Hello, I am Hippocrates, and this is my first video really documenting a progression of ideas that I want to start at the beginning of Western civilization and move forward. So, I want to cover the spiritual and philosophical foundation of the world's greatest people, the philosophy that we're inheriting now, and where I would like to go with this. So, like I said, the first thing that I want to talk about is Socrates. And he was a brilliant man. Born in the age of Pericles, he was the first human centered philosopher, and he considered, among other things, that the unexamined life is not worth living. Now, what more true of a statement? In this world, it seems like we may have slaves walking around us and sheep walking around us, but that's just not a life that I would like to live. It's not a desirable set of circumstances for almost anybody. So with this idea, he was accused of corrupting the youth using his method of thinking. His method of thinking is now called the Socratic method, and it was brilliant, man. The way he did it was he would ask you questions and make you come up with conclusions. So it was his method of teaching was by essentially encouraging the student to think. Brilliant, utterly brilliant. So, for anyone that's listening, and anyone that wants to participate, anyone that wants a good conversation, what do you think about that? Do you think that the unexamined life is worth living or not worth living? Is ignorance bliss? Right, that's the juxtaposition to it. I personally don't think ignorance is bliss. I think the unexamined life is not worth living. So, he also believed that some key aspects of living an examined life includes discussing the sources of virtue, happiness, discussing the nature of goodness, the nature of truth, the nature of beauty, discussing the immortality of the soul, and the origin and structure of the universe. So, I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on this. So, on the source of virtue, to me, virtue comes from I believe virtue comes from the intellect, from a harmony between the intellect and the feeling soul, from a sentient judge is where virtue comes from. And happiness is when happiness is a very interesting word. It's so interesting that I actually have it tattooed on my body. A white ink tattoo, not very notable, not very noticeable either. And what I like about the word happiness is the understanding of eudaimonia. When I use the word happiness, I like eudaimonia, which is an Aristotelian concept. And essentially what eudaimonia is this belief that it's a state of full satisfaction with your entirety. It's more about satisfaction than it is about like a transient hedonistic sort of state that can also be called happiness. A drug binge can be considered happiness, but it's not a life fulfilling state. And, and furthermore, eudaimonia may even extend beyond the grave into the afterlife. So I know personally I won't be completely fulfilled and complete and ready to die until I have grandkids. I think that'll be a very important moment when I have grandkids. Um, because until then, I won't have essentially completed my mission here. Having kids is great, right? But like, uh, you don't just want to have kids. You want to make sure that your kids can propagate as well. That's essentially, I think, the goal of the genes is to have kids until your kids have, or be alive until your kids have kids, and ensure that there's two generations beyond you. So I think that's a big source of satisfaction. Otherwise, what is the nature of goodness? What is good? I'd love to hear your thoughts again, anyone that's listening. My idea on good is something like, oh, I like to think in terms of economy almost. So you can have a thing and you can produce, let's say, a trinket, and that is one good. You produce two trinkets, and that's two goods. You produce 10 trinkets, and you have 10 goods, and um, so essentially creating something is a good. Whereas, and you can take that ad infinitum. So the ultimate good is the creation of everything. So the whole universe, the creator of the whole universe is the goodest. If there is some agency or some event that actually created the whole universe, call it the Big Bang or God, whatever you want to call it, I like both of those terms. That event was the best, the goodest event. And that agent or that code, that law, that code, I think, is a really good way of describing it, is the goodest code. So what is truth, then? So truth is a very interesting thing. There's a Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris discussion on what is truth that just took me away. Like, these guys, they ended the conversation like, oh, we failed, blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, this is the best conversation I've heard yet. Like, it was brilliant. So what is truth? Because what is language at the beginning of the day, right? What is language? And at the end of the day, what is this specific word truth? And so there are a couple things about it. There's this mathematical analysis of the universe where it's like, maybe there is this empirical truth that we're all searching for. And that's what the modernists were trying to approach. They were trying to get down to, and that's what scientists are trying to approach, ideally, is what is truth? Let's get some data, let's crunch the numbers, let's get statistical averages, and then we'll make a paper and we'll publish it, and then we'll have people look at it and make sure that our methods were done right, and then maybe it gets replicated, maybe 10 other people did similar studies, and then someone else can do a study about those studies, and and do a systematic analysis, and then maybe we're getting close to the actual truth, right? Uh, we're getting close to the correct code, the correct law, the correct rule, the correct nature of this thing that we're trying to describe. Um, yeah, so that's one approach to it. But then the other one is that it's, oh, I'm not going to do it well. It's Jordan Peterson's approach to truth was starting with essentially, I suppose that was closer to Jordan Peterson's definition. I don't know. I don't remember too much now. This was several months ago. I'd love for anyone to respond and fill in that blank. So the next question is, what is the nature of beauty? Right? What is that? I think beauty is a perception of something that we find uh, pleasurable. Beauty starts in the limbic system and is a dopaminergic response, a serotonergic response that matches in some sort of consonant way with our expectation and our desires. It's a deeply personal phenomenon. And what one finds to be beautiful, I believe, is indicative of one's orientation in the world. I think that's a truth. Is the soul immortal? I believe the soul can be immortal. Some souls have been very persistent. So what do I mean by soul? It gets back to that code idea, right? So I like to think of the universe as this undying mind, the mind of God. That this thing, that soul is utterly immortal. The universe seems to be immortal. I believe it to be so. I have no proof for it, but I think it seems to be immortal. It seems to go red shifting ad infinitum, and so in that way, it seems to be something like a ray, where it has a starting point, and then it goes on forever. And so, if you were to consolidate all of that magnitude into a word, that word is God, and that has a code, and therefore it is a spirit, and um, and that soul, that spirit, seems to be immortal. Other ones, they can live past the body, you know. So the code that Jesus Christ laid out um, was utterly staying, and it is very staying, very powerful. The Buddha had a good one. Muhammad has a very staying uh, spirit, um, largely because these spirits have been codified, written down, and documented, and then kept and maintained by various um, defenders of the spirit. Medicine is another spirit. So the spirit of, say, um, spirit of, let's say, I guess Apollo, maybe, right? Or Asclepius. Hygeia, Panacea. These spirits seem to be quite staying. Other ones are the pantheon seems to be quite staying. There's Mars, and these spirits are deeply in there. Venus is in there. The archetypes, they are quite staying. Other ones less so. Our individual spirit as an individual, that the spirit of that one person that distinctly did that thing, that is a fleeting sort of spirit. That's what I believe. So, despite the fact that Socrates is considered one of the greatest philosophers of all time by his many successors, his method is still used today. His contemporaries listened to his apology and still sentenced him to death. That was a wild thing. He died just like Jesus, and they actually sentenced Aristotle to death, as I'll discuss in the Aristotle discussion. That's just mind-bending, like, the guy just speaks truth to society, and it's like, no, that's too much truth. Too much truth, man. Too much truth. We're gonna kill you now. What the heck? Not just to society, but to the power structure. So anyway, I'll leave you with this question. You think that could happen in our time? Do you think that could happen in the West right now? Socrates being put to death. Let me hear what you think. All right. Have a good one.